There we go. Sorry, I'm moving some windows around here so that I can see as much as I possibly can in my chats and whatnot. Okay. All right, for anybody that is watching this later, this is an NDA orientation and training on June 16th, 2022. Okay, can everybody see my presentation here? I will start it from the beginning. All right.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so overview of agenda. So really what we're going to talk about tonight is I'm going to talk probably about a lot of things that some of you need to know all of it. Some of you will need to know some of it. You know, if you move from like a different position in the future, like you're treasurer now, and you decide, hey, I want to be the chair, maybe more of this will be relevant in the future. So, so we're going to talk about history and purpose, kind of where this all came from. A bulk of it's going to be about administration and kind of how to, you know, how to run meetings, the agendas, the minutes, so on and so forth. We'll talk about marketing and communication and how we help and how you can market and communicate and help with communicating with folks that in your neighborhood. We'll talk about the grant program for sure and the ins and outs of that. We'll talk a bit about land use. Land use is definitely an important part of the NDAs, but there is another training that possibly some of you have participated in that the planning department gave just a few months ago, and they're going to do that annually. They know a lot more about planning than I do. But we'll talk a bit tonight about some of the sort of really basic stuff about, you know, giving, you know, what do you do when you get one of these applications and some of the things about that, how to give testimony if you want to do that to city council, things like that. Then we'll just talk about other community engagement efforts that I work on, the city works on as well, to kind of complement what we do with our neighborhood associations. All right. So, to start with, congratulations. You are now a public official as according to Oregon Revised Statute, that number right there. Really what that means is there is this giant book if you ever get really interested in wanting to know what a public official really is, that is done by our the Ethics Commission at the state. But really what it means for the NDAs is you're leading the conversation and facilitating decision-making process in your neighborhood, but really most of it is facilitating conversations. The NDAs don't necessarily make decisions on anything. They're not the planning commission, they're not city council. They're mostly advisory. Obviously the neighborhood can take positions at times on certain subjects, whether, you know, for or against land use decisions, that sort of thing, but there's really no decision making necessarily, except for, like, you know, when you decide, you know, how your grant funding is spent. You know, when we talk about being a public official, we're really talking about being civil, honest, friendly, and adhering to your bylaws, just being good people to one another, is general rule. We do have a code of conduct that we are asking folks to sign. Some of you will probably sign that. After this training, I can send that out to make sure folks have an opportunity to do that. All of our board and committee members as well sign a code of conduct. We started doing it with NDAs as well a few years ago, just actually in 2021. And it's a very, it's a document that just helps us kind of have some ground rules, I guess, as a group overall on kind of how we're going to treat one another. And again, I think it really revolves around just common sense, being good to one another, human beings, and you know, welcoming to people who come to your meetings and that sort of thing. Like I said, there's a guide for public officials at that website if anybody's really interested in getting it, you know, spending a whole lot of time learning more about what that means. What I will say about NDAs is you're not necessarily held to the same standards as someone, you know, a city council member, or honestly, even a board of commission member. The board and commission members are appointed by city council. NDAs elect them, you know, your peers elect you in your neighborhood. So that in and of itself makes it a little bit different. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't respect one another and make sure that, we go about our business in a civil, friendly manner. But like I said, it doesn't necessarily hold you to the highest standards like an elected official. Any questions on that concept? Okay. So the NDAs really came about because some of you may know that, Oregon has a pretty well-known and established planning process, and the Department of Land Conservation and Development has a set of goals, and their first goal is actually citizen involvement, and that was adopted in 1974. And what that really said back then was it required the cities to have a citizen involvement program about how people can be involved in land use, and specifically in comprehensive plans, because all cities have to create comprehensive plans about how we're going to use land, basically. So the NDAs kind of came about because of that, and it's one of the official ways that we established back in the 90s to have that happen. There is the Planning Commission, obviously, which is group, it's people from the community are on the Planning Commission. But neighborhood associations, not just in Milwaukee, but across the state, that was one of the sort of bread and butter kind of things that brought about their existence. So if you look in our comprehensive plan under section 1, community engagement goals and policies, goal 1 is about NDAs. That's really one of the only places you're going to see it in our city code related to sort of institutionalizing the NDAs. You'll see it in other areas of the code, like public art murals. The NDA chair is provided with notice, or notice about major pruning or removal of street trees, that sort of thing. But really, the main part of it is in the comprehensive plan. All right. So the boundaries for the NDAs were established in 1994, and back then they were based on school district catchment zones. Those have definitely changed over the years. But the boundaries pretty much have stayed the same. The only neighborhood they're really growing in is Llewellyn, as people have annexed into the city, mostly to connect to sewer. They've been joining, and we've just been adding them to the Llewellyn neighborhood. Linwood had the community college added to its boundaries when the community college came into the city a handful of years ago, but most of the other neighborhoods have pretty much stayed the same. After the boundaries were created, then basically the city asked all the NDAs to create bylaws or apply for official recognition, actually. And that happened between 1994 and 1996. And the last thing I want to mention, if you look at this little map on the right-hand corner here on the bottom, it kind of shows Milwaukee, and then this county has similar groups like NDAs called CPOs, community planning organizations that act like NDAs, but they're really larger groups. Like you see like Southgate CPO, Oak Grove Community Council, they're like as big as the city of Milwaukee. But they're, again, they talk about land use and can organize in a similar manner. So if you have, if you know anybody that lives just outside the city, there are groups that they can also get involved with. All right, the standard bylaws basically were ratified in 1994. Most of the bylaws are the same. Ardenwald's bylaws are a little different because Ardenwald actually has membership in the city of Portland and in the city of Milwaukee. So they have bylaws that relate to both, because they have members in areas in the city of Portland as well. It's very unique. None of the other NDAs have that. But we all pretty much operate around the same set of bylaws. And it's always a good idea if you ever want to take a look at those. It does have information about roles of members, when you're supposed to meet, all of that kind of stuff. So I know we did talk about, some folks in the beginning were mentioning roles. Generally, here's kind of like the major roles: chair, vice chair, treasurer, secretary, land use committee chair, and members, and then other officers. I'm not going to read all of those, but it's fairly self-explanatory with the sort of major roles and responsibilities. These are all listed in the bylaws. As was mentioned earlier, Emily's the chair of an events committee. So what we've over the years, a lot of the NDAs have determined, like, let's keep people actively involved and create other roles for them as well, which is totally fine. And actually, I would encourage that. If someone has a passion for something in particular, I always say, like, create a role for them. It makes them feel more included. They're going to show up, I think, and feel a little bit more, I guess, important to in a lot of ways, which is great. And just make them feel more connected. So, Ardenwald's is kind of like leading this. They have roles for just about everything: arts, parks, you name it. So you can certainly do that. Again, it's outside the bylaws, but that's okay.
Sorry, this is Christine. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go right ahead.
So I am just curious how PSAC fits into that, because PSAC has representatives from every NDA and they have to be elected, but it doesn't look like they're an official officer. So I'm just curious how that fits.
Yeah, it's a little different because it was created like later. So I think it's actually not on the next slide. I am going to talk about that, but but real quick, basically over the years, board and committees have been created. And when they were created, like public safety, they wanted to make sure that there was a involvement from all the different parts of the city, since you're talking about a very important subject. And so they created that committee and said, well, 7 of the members are going to come from each neighborhood, and we're going to have the NDAs appoint those folks. Well, technically the NDAs don't appoint them. They recommend someone, and then city council has to appoint. And that group also has at-large members as well. Right. So there's 7 NDA recommended members, and then some at-large members as well. Like I said, I think it was mostly due to the fact that they wanted to make sure there was representation. We do technically at this point consider PSAC members as, like, official officers of the NDA. So it's just not in the bylaws. I think there's something in the bylaws that mentions about there can be like special groups put together, that can be officers. Another example is when we had the Kellogg treatment plant had a good neighbor committee to spend funding to kind of improve the area around the treatment plant for the neighborhood. And so Historic Milwaukee and Island Station had members on that as well, that the neighborhood associations chose. And you might see that actually, I think I might be reaching out to you in the near future for when we talk about our transportation system planning in the future, and making sure that all the neighborhoods have representation. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions on that one? If you ever want to talk about your specific role more, we can definitely, narrow down on that. But as I mentioned in the beginning, it's kind of like some of it's prescribed, and then some of it's kind of what you're most interested in a lot of ways, to be honest, and what the NDA and overall is most interested in. Let's see. All right, insurance. So the city provides general liability insurance to all the NDAs each year. And so I basically put together spreadsheets of all the NDAs, kind of what you typically do, which includes your meetings. And then I give that to an insurance company and they write policies. So what I know from like what you've done in the past is usually in those policies. And so through the course of the year, most of that stuff is covered. And when I get those policies, I forward them on to all the chairs so that you have them. The current policies expire on July 12th. I'm actually in the process right now, waiting for quotes, patiently waiting for quotes for the renewal. If you ever have anything new come up that that I wasn't aware of, like a new event or something like that that doesn't have insurance, you can just let me know, and we can typically add those to the policies. Good example, Hector Campbell had an event at in the park last year for Halloween, and we added that to the policy for like $40 or something like that. It wasn't a lot. But what I will mention is all of the policies do include one block party, and on our block party permit application, there is a little place on there that says, if anybody in your neighborhood would like to come to the NDAs to get insurance for their block party and not have to obtain it themselves, they can do that. They can visit you at one of your meetings. There's a place for like the chair or another NDA officer to sign. If it's at a time when your NDA is not meeting, like in the summer, sometimes NDAs take off. The chair can also sign it. It was a way for us to try to encourage more people to have block parties because insurance was becoming kind of a barrier.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Because that came up in our group. So if I understood what you just said, I think you just said that under the insurance, one block party is already covered. If more are going to happen, they just need to contact you so that they could be added for that year or something. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we can definitely look to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Usually, like I said, with something like that in the past, it's been a fairly small amount to add something to the policy since we already have one. Whereas like if you're trying to just do it like standalone policy, you know what I mean, outside the policy, it tends to end up being more money. So
Got it. Okay, good. That's great.
yeah. So there's one included, and then let me know if others want to do more. It's been something like block parties are fun. I think it's good for folks, especially in COVID times, getting outside and meeting your neighbors. So yeah. When I get those policies, I'll send them on. There's also certificates for everything. So like, I know some of you meet at schools, some do events that are on, North Clackamas Parks property, school district property. Those are all listed as additionally insured. So they'll have certificates if they need them for permitting purposes, because sometimes they're going to ask you for that. And we can provide that. I think I already mentioned the code of conduct, and I'll make sure I follow up after this meeting about that if folks haven't signed in and been able to take a look at it. All right. Yeah, here we are. NDA representatives on other city committees. I think we already talked about how that works with Public Safety Advisory Committee. Like I said, the NDAs choose them, but then the city council still has to through resolution appoint. And I will say, I've never seen city council not appoint someone that the NDAs have recommended in the time that I've been here. So it usually is on their consent agenda, and it's like, oh, they want to do this, okay, and then it takes about 5 minutes, and then they move on. So happens pretty quickly. Those are usually 2-year terms. All right, annual elections. We just got through that, and some of you were involved in the annual elections. And that happens May of each year. It's listed in the bylaws. We help with publicity on that. And, the NDAs can also help with that when the time comes, to try to encourage people to show up and maybe throw their name in the hat for different positions. But throughout the year, you can definitely hold special elections. You just want to make sure you put it on your agenda and make sure that's on the city website so that it's like a publicly known thing, and so people have an opportunity to participate. So if you lose a treasurer halfway through the year, you can hold a special election to fill that position. Leadership meetings we hold quarterly. So I do this annual training, but also quarterly. Everyone's invited to come, and I have usually a guest speaker talking about relevant subjects. We have a round robin so that people can share with one another kind of what each NDA has been up to. If you ever have any ideas for topics for those meetings, let me know, and I can try to either get a guest speaker on it or talk to make sure we talk about what it is that you're interested in. I think the next one's in September, so we won't have any in July or August. All right, agendas. This is where it starts getting fun. So the agendas are really in a way to have your meetings as efficient as possible. So, putting some effort into sort of making those as good as they can be is worthwhile. They set the tone, kind of how far the conversation is going to go, provide structure. I would recommend that they be fairly consistent, in terms of like the topics, because then people kind of get to know them and kind of know what to expect during certain times of the meeting and that sort of thing. I know, and I say place, I mean, some of the neighborhoods have been moving their meetings around. Most of them have been on Zoom for the last few years, but when we start to get back to more in person, you can certainly move your meetings to different places. We just want to make sure we get the word out to to folks that to make sure they know. People definitely are creatures of habit, and they tend to show up at the same place each time, and that can get confusing a little bit. We do want to ideally post these, this 7 days before the meeting is kind of from our city recorder's office. That's kind of like standard, city council kind of thing. You know, I would say 5 business days is probably ideal. Obviously, we can post it anytime, you know, before the meeting. What I would ask though is agendas do get to me so that I can get them on our city website, because that ensures that your meetings are publicized. That's really our definition of publicized, to be honest, to make sure that anybody in the general public has an opportunity to see the agenda and kind of know what you're talking about. You know, I've had folks kind of put on like Nextdoor and things of that nature, and that's just not considered public because Nextdoor is not necessarily something that everybody's, you know, has access to. And that includes the minutes as well. Let's see. I did want to mention that when you do give me your agendas, we have email subscriptions on the city website or on a bunch of different subjects. And one of them is, go ahead. Yeah.
Can I ask just the quickest question?
Yeah.
Do all committees need to be recording minutes? So if I'm having a smaller meeting, it's not the general meeting, we don't have the secretary isn't there. Do I need to have somebody who is still taking minutes for that meeting and doesn't need to get posted after the fact?
You know, I would probably say no to those types of meetings when you're talking about like events and things like that. You certainly could. I mean, I think the general meeting where you're talking like making decisions about how you're spending money and things like that is probably more important. But, you know, I would say probably you don't have to, but if you wanted to, you could. It certainly wouldn't be a terrible idea. Because then, you know, if someone did ask kind of what happened at that meeting, you'd be able to kind of recall it. And I am going to talk a bit more about minutes and how they don't have to be hard and verbatim and, you know, lengthy, that sort of thing. So maybe after I talk about minutes, you'll be more okay with taking them more. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but so we have subscriptions for each neighborhood on our website. And usually when I get those agendas, I'll make sure I send an email out to whoever subscribes saying, hey, the agenda's been posted, go check it out. And, you know, pretty much the number of folks on there is probably from low 40 emails to 200 or more in one of the neighborhoods. So, you know, your own email list that I know all the NDAs keep probably overlap those for sure. But if you ever also want to just get general information out to people, I can use those email subscriptions to do that as well. So just let me know. Other recommendations for agendas. I always love start and ending times for agenda items, and trying to stick to those times is always awesome. Reviewing the agenda at the beginning and seeing if anybody has anything else they'd like to cover. And, you know, if someone does, that's something not on the agenda, you can always refer to the group. Do you want to talk about that tonight? Should we make time for that tonight? If not, should we save it for the next meeting? That can kind of help with anybody who has something they want to really talk about and take a whole bunch of time up that you really weren't planning for. You know, providing at least a little bit of time for open discussion, calling it open discussion can be helpful sometimes, because again, if people start getting off track, be like, wait, you can talk about that during the open discussion part, not now. We're talking about this. It's actually on the agenda, and that can kind of help maybe manage a little bit of your time. We do have agenda templates. There's a Linwood one there pictured. If you'd like to use those, I created those for folks to make it as easy as possible. If you don't want to create your own, you certainly don't have to though. They all look just like this with the, you know, logo, kind of the same general look. So those are available on the website as well in Word. Basically, if you go to neighborhood and there's where the neighborhood leadership guide is, it's all listed there. But I will follow up with that as well at the end of the meeting. Any questions about agendas? Anything else you just dying to know? All right. I'm going to talk about minutes a little bit. So minutes basically tell your NDA story. There is a minutes guide for board and committees that I also have on the same website. It's a little bit more applicable to board and committees, but it could help if you'd like to take a look at it in terms of like how to go about it, what to include. It gets a little bit more detailed than what I'm going to talk about. But really what you want to hope for is a very efficient way. They should be readable. They definitely should be written by an NDA member, obviously, the secretary. But it's really who, what, where, and when. So, you know, the name of the NDA, type of meeting, date and place. You should probably include the members present, the NDA leadership members present, and if there's like city staff present or maybe another guest speaker. And I did want to bring up pronouns. We're trying to move towards a gender neutral in our minutes pronouns. So, you know, they, them, that sort of thing. You know, I know a lot of folks aren't used to that, and when, you know, in terms of writing, and we're still working on, you know, how we're going about doing that. But I know it is something that we're working on, and that there's also a little bit of a guide in the board and committee minutes guide that I mentioned that talks a little bit about how to write gender neutral. Standing agenda items is, you know, something you want to make sure there's always, like, you know, when the minutes are approved, reviewed and approved, you're always going to see that on the agenda or in the minutes.
Casey, excuse me, I have a quick question about minutes. We read all of our minutes verbatim at every meeting. My question being, can we send those, like, after they've been typed up, before they've been, you know, approved by the whole group the next month? Can a draft be sent and it be put on the website? Let the members look at it, read it, and then when they come to the meeting, we can just go ahead and improve it and then send you the final to put on the website to keep, instead of us having to read everything that happened and taking up 10, 15 minutes to read up everything every minute.
Yes. So typically you could send me the draft minutes the day after the meeting if you have them done. And then I can put them on the website and folks can refer to them there. You could also just send the draft minutes in addition to sending them to me and putting them on the city website. You could also send them out to your membership anytime between, like, you know, the day the meeting ends to the next meeting. And for sure, you can it just kind of assume folks have read them. You don't need to read them at the meeting itself.
Okay.
You know, 9 chances at it, most of the time there's no changes, and they're just kind of approved and life goes on. But if there are changes, then, you know, the approved minutes can then be sent to me.
Okay.
Flip those out for the draft.
I think it would save a lot more time instead of having to read you know,
Definitely.
especially if we have a long meeting and the person's sitting there reading it for 15 minutes, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. That was my question. Thank you.
No problem. And then the last thing really that are most important for minutes is motions. You know, any formal action the NDA is taking. That could be, like, you know, improving, you know, a grant request, spending money on something that the NDA would like to do. It could be supporting, you know, a certain cause, or, you know, it could be we're going to write a letter to city council about X, Y, or Z, that sort of thing as well. So really, those are the big things. You don't need to, like, necessarily have names. You really don't want to include personal things, no verbatim. You definitely don't want, you know, personal remarks. Opinions don't need to be in there. That's, you know, can be left at the meeting. So it's not necessarily what everyone's saying back and forth. It's really what is happening, what you plan on doing with something about something, that sort of thing. So I hope that helps. And any other questions about minutes? The minutes guide that I mentioned, you know, I definitely, if you're a secretary and taking minutes, it's worthwhile to take a look at that a little bit closer too. All right. I'm going to talk about public records law a little bit. You know, at our last training last year, I had our city recorder, Scott Stauffer, come to the training as well. But this year I let him off the hook. I think his kid's last day of school is today, so I know how that goes. Mine was last week, so it's over with. Basically, you know, a public record, and the reason I bring this up is because we do keep the agendas and minutes forever for NDAs. They're put in a system called HPRM that cities use. It's in cloud-based. We don't necessarily have them here. They're kept in this big database, but yeah. So once I get your agendas and minutes, I keep them forever. So you don't really have to. What I would say is, typically I recommend maybe 3 years, keeping documents like treasury reports and things like that for 3 years, just so you have them for your own use and you can pass those on to the next treasurer or whomever. Agendas you really don't need to keep. If you ever need them, you can ask me and I will provide them to you. But you definitely don't need to keep that stuff. The financial documents, since you do have your own bank accounts and everything, we don't have all those details. We only have your annual report that you give us. And I do keep that forever as well. So if you're ever looking for that, and you're, 50 years from now, you're really looking for that report you did last year, I will have, I probably won't be me, of course, but someone will have it available to you. State law determines how long we keep the records. So there's, a lot of information that you can get from the Secretary of State's office about all this stuff. But I think if you go with the 3-year rule, you're pretty safe. Public meetings law. So I really wanted to bring this up mostly because of like reasonable notice. The NDA meetings are public meetings, and we want to make sure people know that they are happening and have an opportunity to attend them. Because the way I always look at it is whether or not someone in your neighborhood's coming to your meetings or involved, they're members of your NDA. Just by living in your neighborhood, because if you look at your bylaws and who's a member, it's really, if you live there, you own a business or represent a nonprofit, or a representative of a business that's there, you're automatically a member. There's no, there's no fees, there's no dues, that sort of thing. And folks can basically show up at any time they want and sort of be involved. So we want to make sure they know, kind of what you're doing. I wish more people would show up sometimes, because I know you're all doing the hard work for them on behalf of them. But I guess that's the way it goes. And when I talk about quorums for the NDAs are really like a majority. So, if you have those officers I mentioned, the chair, the vice chair, secretary, treasurer, land use committee members, you could basically say the majority of those folks would be a quorum. So I always recommend, if you're talking about, NDA business, especially if you're talking about making a decision about something or, that sort of thing, you want to do that in a public meeting. You don't want to do that on the side, like whether it's by email or, telephone, or you want to make sure people have a chance to participate, and that they've been told how to participate. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? All right.
I just have, oh, I'm sorry, I'll go afterwards.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
So I told everybody at our meeting in June that the new officers and we would have meet a couple of times over the summer to discuss who's responsible for what and things like that. So we wouldn't be making any decisions about anything. So to me, that means it's totally fine.
I think so. I mean, if you want to get together and just kind of like talk about what you think the future looks like, I think that would be okay. It's good bonding experiences as well. You get to know each other, and because I mean, I think it certainly doesn't apply to if all the NDA leaders want to go out and get a beer one night. I think that's okay.
Cool. Thank you.
Things like that for sure. It just that you leave all the business to like the actual meetings, when you're actually making decisions and that sort of thing. Again, there's an Oregon Attorney General's Public Records and Meetings Manual that's super long. If you ever want to check that out, it'd be really fun to take a look at. All right, so 22 is an election year. So I wanted to talk a little bit. This comes up every time we have a lot of elections, and the NDAs are probably going to get asked to host candidates coming up, for sure. So 4 of the city's 5 city council seats will be up for election in November. So I can guarantee you that some of them, if not all of them, are going to ask to come to your meetings, talk about their candidacy. your NDA can choose whether or not to host candidates or not. You can actually, you could say, hey, we're just not spending time doing that. But you certainly can. And you know, it can be kind of a fun thing for the NDA to do, to have, you know, that kind of thing. And that the same goes for ballot measures. If there's anybody that wants to come and talk, you know, pro or against a ballot measure. But the important thing to keep in mind is if a candidate, city councilor, let's say, comes and says, I would like to, or someone running for the mayor, let's say mayor of Milwaukee, somebody calls you and says, I'd like to come to the meeting, just, you can say yes, but just make sure you invite all of the candidates. Whether or not they all come does not matter, as long as they've been given the opportunity to attend. Same goes for a ballot measure. Those get a little more tricky though, because it's hard sometimes to identify the you know, if someone's pro something, how do you get the other side of the story, and what group is that? You know, sometimes it might be obvious and other times it might not be, but you know, you can deal with those when the time comes and we can talk about it. Because sometimes there's not an organized group of people that you could reach out to say, hey, could you come and, you know, provide your opinions on this, or, you know, your stance. I think for the most part, you're going to hear from candidates, and just make sure you invite them all.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay. So for candidates, then, if you hear from one, should you reach out to all of them and say, this person's coming on at this meeting, would you all like to come to the same meeting, or do they go to different meetings? How does that work?
I would invite them to the same meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. And like I said, if they can't make it, that's okay. You can still host the people that have asked to come. You just have to give them the opportunity to come. That's all. Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting November, that's for sure. In that way.
Yeah.
Just don't we have like four openings on council this year? Jason?
Yep, 4 of the 5. Yep.
Okay.
And I'm assuming a new mayor, because I think Gamba has had his
Well,
reached his term limit.
Yes.
that's
he's
one
one-
of them, I think.
Yep, he's definitely one of them.
Oh,
Yeah,
got
the mayor position is one of them. Yeah, one of
The
them.
mayor and like 3 counselors, I think, is what we've got open.
Yes. Yeah.
I think only Kathy Heisey is the only one that's still still good for a couple of years yet, I think.
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
So some changes ahead.
and Jason, I don't know what you can see, but Michelle has her hand up.
Oh, I can see it now. Yes. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. So I think it's in this topic. In Historic Milwaukee, we have a chair who has taken a leave of absence because they're going to be involved in the RFP process, or think they will be involved in that on behalf of some, you know, proposal for the city hall repurposing.
Mhm.
And my understanding is that the NDAs are going to have some sort of, I don't know, role in making opinions. What is that role that we will have with that RFP or something like that?
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's necessarily, I mean, I think that it, you know, I'd have to dig that out. I might have to go look. I'm not entirely sure.
Okay.
Yeah, let me get back to you on that. 'Cause I don't want to miss, because I don't remember. Basically, there were some goals, you know, that were created by a committee a few years ago for the city hall that was made up of it was like a special committee put together of citizens. And I don't recall, maybe there's some information in there or in the RFP process that involves NDAs, but I'll have to check on that.
I think Scott Stoffer headed it up. And
Yeah.
It was called the Blue Ribbon Committee.
Yeah.
Okay. Just so
Yeah,
that we understand what, you know, what it is we will or won't be
Yeah.
invited to do.
I will take a look and see what I can find.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so elections, any other questions about elections? Oh, the other thing I did want to mention, I always recommend in terms of, you know, the NDAs in your positions as officers, it's really a place, it's a forum for these conversations about, you know, topics, candidates, and that sort of thing. I don't recommend that NDAs your NDA, yourself as the chair of an NDA or treasurer of, either endorses a candidate using those titles, or even the NDA endorsing candidates or ballot measures. I don't recommend that. Again, you really want the NDA to be a place where people feel comfortable to come and talk, and have these types of conversations, and not necessarily feel like, well, if they're not endorsing a certain candidate or a ballot measure or something like that, that they're not welcome. So you're certainly free to support candidates and ballot measures as yourself, but I wouldn't, you never attach your title to that. It's just not recommended. And that's, it's something that I've seen others do in other cities, and doesn't necessarily get them in trouble, but I would say it can just be a little bit off-putting, I think, for some people in the neighborhood. So does that make sense? Okay. All right. So all this stuff about public officials and elections and all that, when in doubt, you can ask me, but I'll probably end up asking the city recorder's office, who is really the experts in all this stuff. And that's Scott Stoffer, and our new deputy city recorder is Nicole Madigan, who you may have run into her at our front counter at some point in the past, but now she's been promoted to the deputy city recorder position. So yeah, anytime you have those types of questions, they're really good. And if they don't know the answer, they usually will talk to the Secretary of State's office, and they'll give them the answer. All right. So the NDA meetings are basically ran by Robert's Rules of Order. There's, you can get this book, and it's just like, there's so much content in there. I think really the ones you have to really, you're going to use the most are the really simple ones, the sort of aye and no kind of thing, when when you're looking for a majority vote. Show of hands for smaller groups, you can do that. You can do a roll call, or you could do a secret ballot, I suppose, as well. I know with Zoom, folks have been, in fact, I was at a Linwood meeting recently where they were using the polling when they did their elections, and that was actually really awesome. So if anybody wants to dig into the polling, you can set those up pretty quick live, and then everybody can just pretty much vote on something secretly, or however, really quickly and efficiently, because it can get kind of tricky, like put your hand up, or if you can't see everybody and there's a whole bunch of people in the meeting. In person, I think most of the times people have done sort of the voice vote for the most part. And basic rules for small groups in terms of introducing a motion, changing a motion, adopting and adjourning. I think usually it's someone makes a motion and someone seconds it, and then it goes to the group for approval. Those are really the areas that you're probably going to use the most of. If your NDA really wants to get into Robert's Rules, though, you can go for it if you'd like, and get this book and like do all the really technical ways of going about it. But I think those are sufficient for really running your meetings overall. I kind of, to be honest with you, sometimes I wish there was some other way of doing it, because I think it sounds very old school to run the meetings like that. But that's what we have, and we've had it for a long time. So, all right. I was going to talk a little bit about ground rules. I mentioned the code of conduct that we have, but I always talked about in these trainings that if your NDA would like to create its own set of ground rules, you certainly can, especially when you have a new group forming, that I know some of the NDAs have. Coming together and just kind of making a short list of ground rules can be kind of nice to have, honestly, in the future. Not to say that the group itself is going to have any types of issues, but you're going to have a lot of visitors to your meetings who might be upset about stuff, things like that, and disagreements. Being able to sort of point to some ground rules can be helpful, especially if you kind of put them up in front of the room. When you meet in person, you can kind of print them on a big piece of paper. There's some samples in the leadership guide that I put on here. Treating with respect, listening actively, share your own experiences and opinions with I rather than generalizing with we or they, things like that. So you could start here and, your group could certainly mold these to fit kind of what you think it would be most useful if you'd like to do that. And then the next thing would be work plans. I mean, I think these can be difficult. And I think, come September, always a good time to do it in September. It's kind of like kickoff of the year. Since a lot of the NDAs don't meet in the summer, and people are kind of like getting more active when the sun goes down and the days get a little darker. So, here's some general, ways to that, you might be able to lead that process. And if you ever want your, me to come to one of your meetings, let me know to kind of maybe help you with this type of process. I'd be happy to do that. I'm not the best facilitator in the world, but I certainly could be that sort of, person that's not involved with your NDA that could kind of help facilitate that if you think it would be helpful. In some ways to do that, it's really a way for you to I get asked all the time, how do you keep volunteers and how do you recruit them? And I think making a work plan and like having a clear path and kind of where you're headed for the year can be helpful. And I say here, discussing general interests, start with discussing your general interests of new and long-term officers, might be a good place to start. What have you been successful at? What have you struggled with? That sort of thing. And then I think, discussing your overall mission, obviously the bylaws have kind of outlined of what the NDAs are about, but your NDA can kind of make its own way as well. I've seen NDAs really focused on events. I've seen NDAs really focused on land use. I've seen NDAs, really focused on, their concerts in the park, and that's their like thing that they're really going to do and make sure that happens for the year. And, at the bottom of this page, you can see like, I also just would say like, if you have like 3 or 4 goals, they can be pretty simple. I wouldn't try to overdo it. I think sometimes the NDAs honestly try to do too much, and it kind of burns people out, and then you never really succeed in any one area. But if you can take some really good wins through the year, even 1 or 2, 3, everybody's going to be really happy about that. And keeping it simple. I mean, I think being realistic with how much time you have and how much time the group has to spend on stuff is important. Because I think sometimes we all forget how long certain things take to do and what it takes to make things happen. So I'm not going to get in too much detail about that because I want to make sure we stay on time here. All right, recruiting and retaining members. These are just some ideas that we can talk about for your upcoming meetings. When we go back to in person, I'm all for providing refreshments. Using a little bit of that NDA money for food, I think is totally fine. Especially if you have enough food that where it's almost like folks can show up at your meetings, especially if they're in the evening, and get some dinner and not have to sort of plan around dinner. Might help get folks there and put them in a better mood if they're not hungry. I suppose so. That can help. Provide signage at your meeting site. I mean, some we've had neighborhoods meet in schools like way back in the cafeteria, and sometimes people show up and they don't know where they're going. So if you can put up signs, that's helpful. Maybe have a greeter. This NDA program flyer here is always available to you. It's a general one about all the NDAs, but certainly I can provide copies of that if you ever need it. Because I know not all the NDAs have their own flyers. Making sure new members are just kind of brought into the fold on kind of what it is that you're talking about. I think sometimes we get so comfortable with one another that we forget that maybe that one person showed up that's never been to an NDA meeting before. Making sure they kind of feel like they're not stepping into like this, private group of people. It can feel a little bit uncomfortable, allow for maybe a little bit of social time, at your meeting. I think that's okay. Or even have a meeting maybe once a year where it's just social. Maybe it's not, you're not talking business, just gonna have some food and we're gonna just hang out. Michelle.
Yeah, tell me if this is the right slide to ask this question. our NDA is discussing keeping a Zoom version available when we start having in-person meetings, which we have not done yet.
Mhm.
And we want those, but it does still seem like it could be very helpful for people who don't want to go out at night in the winter, or, just
Yeah.
many reasons to have a Zoom alternative.
That's a good question. And actually, I made a lot of this training was made in the past before Zoom. And I meant to put more of that in here. Actually, we would highly encourage the NDAs to continue with a Zoom option, if at all possible. The reason is we actually have was passed in the state legislature that public meetings have to have a virtual option when they're in person moving forward. So all of our city council meetings, all of our board and commission meetings, when they go back to it being in person, have to provide a virtual option. NDAs are also public meetings, so we should strive to do that, and if we can. And I think in the last year or so, I've sent some emails out and some information, like in the NDA Friday updates, about technology, ideas. Whether that's just a laptop with a microphone on a table. So yeah, we should strive to do that if we can, for sure. And yeah, go
And
ahead.
for us, it is the technology. It's like, well, how would we do that? And
Yeah.
if you sent us that information, I'm sorry that probably lots of us didn't hold on to it.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think is if we can have laptops, NDA funding can definitely be used to purchase something as long as it stays with the NDA through, the leadership. So if you wanted to purchase an NDA laptop and, maybe microphone and camera, you could certainly do that. But if you have your own that, you've been using all along, maybe one of the NDA leaders has one to bring to the meeting, that can be used as well. And I think in the end, as long as we try our best, I think some of the meeting locations don't have good Wi-Fi access. Honestly, that's another problem. Island Station meets in the Grange and not great Wi-Fi access there. And so that's definitely going to become an issue as well as we get back to more in-person meetings. So, we'll just work through those details as we go, and certainly let me know if you need help. I will say the city is not going to be able to provide folks with computers and laptops and that sort of thing, unfortunately. But the NDA funding is there to buy that kind of stuff if need be.
Jason,
Yeah.
to the issue of the Wi-Fi access, because we were kind of coming up against that too. We were thinking about meeting in the park, over the summer. Does the city have access to like hotspots, like something that could be used temporarily to create some internet access?
I think we might have one. We don't. I honestly don't know if we have any right now. I've used one for our solstice event down at the riverfront in the past for Llewellyn to take credit cards, but I don't think we have one.
Okay.
Right now. That's something that the NDAs could purchase if they wanted to, if that would be useful. So
cool.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge as we move forward. We're all working on it. Honestly, I think we're a good point with city council now, but we went through some growing pains there for a couple months on making this all happen, because they're televised as well. So like trying to get all of that to work together has been challenging. All right. Some of the other options that, ideas I have here, like relocate meetings. I know I said try to be consistent, but relocating meetings sometimes can be helpful maybe for some folks. Hector Campbell's been playing around a lot with meeting in a park or, changing the times, maybe do a weekend meeting here and there. Other NDAs could certainly try that too. If that's something that you're hearing, your folks, you're just hearing from folks like, I can't come on a Thursday night at 6. I just can't. Maybe try to move it. It might be a possibility. But what I would recommend though, if you do move it, make sure we talk about it a little bit, because sometimes I wouldn't want you to run into problems like all of a sudden you just schedule your meeting when the Public Safety Advisory Committee meets because you have an NDA member who also needs to be at that meeting. So we have to make sure we're not running into those types of challenges. And then group setup, that sort of thing, you know, we get back to in person. I mean, trying to like make sure that's like, doesn't feel like you're necessarily in a classroom. If it's in a classroom, maybe a semicircle kind of thing can be helpful. You know, these are just some ideas. I honestly do not have a silver bullet to how to get new people involved and making sure people stick around. Unfortunately, it's always been a challenge, and it always will be, because people are busy. And I think there's just a million reasons why people don't get involved or do get involved. So, all right. And marketing and communication, I'm kind of moving into that now. So NDA maintain email lists. I know each NDA pretty much keeps its own email list. That's great. Some tips for using email. I know some of the NDAs, some of the NDA leaders have chosen to like create new emails just for their NDA business. You know, that's something that you can always consider if you feel like having another email. That way it doesn't get intertwined with all your personal stuff and gets confusing. So you might want to consider that. Again, just let me know so I make sure that we're getting this, I'm sending the stuff to you in the right place. I wouldn't say, you know, trying to limit emails, especially if they're going out to like a lot of people. Obviously, people don't like to be spammed. That's actually one of the reasons I started the NDA Friday updates, because I get asked a lot to like, hey, can you share this with the NDAs? Hey, can you share this with the NDAs? And I got to the point where I was like, I don't want to send you, you know, 16 emails through the week. I'm just going to send you one. And then it grew a little bit from there to make sure, you know, I'm adding other things, but I do get a lot of folks asking me to share stuff with you from other staff. So I wanted to make sure that I'm not sending too many emails. You know, subject lines, general emails, professional, use BCC when you're sending to large lists. So, you know, they're not getting everybody's email. I think some people aren't necessarily comfortable sharing that. Also, it just looks, you know, fills up the entire top of the page if there's too many emails. So using BCC can be helpful in that way. I'm sure plenty of people are already doing these types of things. So NDA maintained websites. The only NDA currently have their own website is Ardenwald. Hector Campbell decided they're not going to keep theirs going any longer and just use other social media and that sort of thing. We, of course, have NDA web pages for all the NDAs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And, you know, content and that sort of thing for that. Social media, this may not totally be accurate, but all the NDAs are using social media. I need to add some to this list that I know of. And I think that's certainly become a way to go about communicating. I mean, I think Facebook can almost do what a website can do in terms of just the simple things that you want to get out, and, you know, especially if you're having events and that sort of thing. So always encourage social media. All right. Friday email updates, as you guys know, I mean, I send those to all the NDA leaders every Friday. I also send it to the board and committee members, city council, and department heads here. So if there's anything you ever want to share with the entire everybody, certainly send it along. I will say it's kind of an email dump. It's not necessarily supposed to, I don't really treat it as a newsletter necessarily. I don't really have the time every week to create a newsletter, so which is why I do the Friday updates. You know, it's not ever going to be a well-polished newsletter like the pilot. It's mostly a way for me to communicate with you regularly so that I can kind of push things out to you and you know what's happening. So if it's ever too long, I apologize. I mostly just want to make sure you're getting, you know, what you should be getting. City website, the NDA web pages. So I'm always looking for new content for that. So if you take a look at on there and there's, you know, if there's something you want to make sure gets on there, just, you know, let me know. I try to update them as much as I can. But I certainly miss stuff, and, you know, so, you know, check in on that every now and then. And if there's anything coming up that you want to make sure gets on there, you know, make sure you send it to me. I already talked about the email subscriptions that we have on the city website. And there's a picture of it. So you can subscribe on a bunch of stuff, neighborhoods. And then there's also like all the different public meetings, Milwaukee Poetry Series, all of that kind of stuff as well. All right, the pilot. So the pilot is we've been basically doing the pilot for over 20 years, and having NDAs submit articles for pretty much the entire time, I believe. The due date's sent by Jordan Imlaw, who I work with closely, our communication program manager. The articles can really be written by anyone in your NDA. It doesn't have to be the chair. It typically has been, but it can be anybody. Jordan usually includes some tips on that. So trying to keep it to 250 words or less. We only have 2 pages for this part, and it never changes. Write in third person active voice, if you can. Submitting articles as Word documents is always best because we can actually like copy and paste on that sort of thing a little bit easier. If you are submitting photos, which you certainly can, make sure you do that as a separate attachment. Don't embed it into the email, because then it doesn't come out as well, and we can't manipulate it as well. One thing we get asked for a lot for the pilot is like, can you put this flyer in the pilot? We really can't do that. We can't really take a flyer and make it work within those 2 pages. If we shrunk it down super small, it wouldn't really be legible. So really my recommendation, if you have an event coming up, like a concert or whatever it might be, photos is probably your best to sort of complement the text. And that'll come across when people are reading it, and it'll catch their eye better than a flyer would. I'm always tell folks, keep the topics relevant to your neighborhood. Like, imagine someone in your neighborhood reading this particular article that you wrote, and wanting to get something out of it, kind of what the NDA is doing, what you've been working on, what you've accomplished. Think of it as a way to maybe get more people involved, and you want to make sure that they know what's happening. What it isn't is an editorial. I mean, we have had NDAs try to submit sort of an editorial opinion-based articles about sort of a topic or something like that. While we can publish those, I will tell you that we do a decent amount of editing if something like that comes to us, because we want to make sure that this is something that's the editorials like you see in the Clackamas Review or the Oregonian. This isn't the right place for that. Relevant facts about the NDA's work and kind of what you're doing is more useful to your neighbors than personal opinions. So we've been dedicating these 2 pages, the city, for a long time. So it's valuable space to kind of reach out to folks in your neighborhood. So if I guess look at it that way for the most part. If you ever struggle for what to put in, certainly let me know, or Jordan, honestly. He might have some ideas. I know it's every month except January. Sometimes it's like, I don't know what to put in there this month. And to be honest, it's okay. If you don't have anything, we'll pretty much just put your meeting, time, location, when you're meeting next, that sort of thing, contact info. There just might be certain months where you just don't have a lot to say. And that's totally okay. You don't have to just make stuff up just to make something up. We're going to fill that space with other stuff. Maybe you're giving another neighborhood who has a lot to say a little bit more space, something like that. So we try to make that work as best we can. Any questions on the pilot? All right. And I actually encourage NDAs to share that duty a little bit. Kind of pass it around a little bit. It's kind of a fun thing to do, to see what you wrote, in every mailbox in all of Milwaukee. It goes to every mailbox in 97222. So it actually even gets to some people who don't live in Milwaukee, which is something I wanted to mention to you. Sometimes you'll get confusion. We get confusion a little bit because people think they live in the city. Because I get the pilot, well, of course I live in the city. Well, these aren't addressed individually to you. It's postal carrier routes, which is much cheaper to mail than if we put individual like addresses and names on mailing, like way cheaper. So that's how we have to send it. And those postal carrier routes don't match the city boundaries. They move around, and like it can be confusing. And in addition to that, sometimes people don't get it and they're mad at us. and it really means that there's a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe the postal carrier ran out the end of the street and they're like, I'm not gonna go back and get 2 more. Or, there's just a whole bunch of reasons. But if you hear from somebody who lives in the city who's consistently not getting it, we can look into it and try to figure out, what is going on. Why is that the case? Because we certainly don't want that to happen. All right. How are we doing? Everybody's doing okay? Do we have any other questions? I know I'm doing a lot of talking and makes me feel odd to talk this much, but I'm going to keep going. All right, so the matching grant program. I want to give you a little bit of history about the matching grant program so that you kind of know where it came from, because I think sometimes when we talk about it, it gets a little bit confusing, and it came from a place that it's changed over the years. So back in 1998, the program was established, and essentially it was to help the NDAs, the neighborhood associations, do more. I talked about how it was all based on land use in the beginning, and I think the city at some point was like, let's try to provide funding to the NDAs so they can do more, community gathering, community building, all that kind of stuff. And so this was created back then under certain categories. So the funding could include neighborhood organizing, organizational development, neighborhood physical improvements, preservation, cultural, social, recreational initiatives. Those categories actually still exist, but there's a bunch of stuff that has changed. So back then, we had money for all the NDAs, and each NDA had to apply for the funding through the city for individual projects. So you come up with an idea, you fill out an application. In addition to that, you had to come up with a way to match it dollar for dollar. So if you asked for $500, you'd have to find $500 in match. And that could come from volunteer labor. In fact, at least 25% had to come from volunteer labor, cash, or like the cash value of like donated supplies or equipment. Most of the time, it was primarily volunteer labor that you would sort of forecast for that project. So that sort of matching part of it, and the fact that we had the money and you had to apply for it, changed in 2010 for a couple reasons. I wasn't here at that time. I was here for the matching part of it in the early 2000s, but I wasn't here during the time that it changed. I guess at that point, staff time to administer it was becoming a problem. It's taking too much time, and NDAs wanted easier access to the funds. So now, starting in 2010, we provide the NDAs with a lump sum of $4,000, and not only are the NDAs receiving the grants and able to spend them on things that they come up with, project ideas, but you're actually able to take proposals from others to support other community groups and nonprofits and that sort of thing. But the categories and how you can spend the money haven't changed. It's just now there's definitely a lot more responsibility put on the NDAs to manage the funds and that sort of thing, which can become challenging. As new leaders come and go, that sort of thing, we're always kind of learning. We do have a grants policy that I would encourage everybody to take a look at. And I'll send some of these links to you later. But NDAs develop, approve, and use the funds, and then community partners can also apply through an application process. And funding is kept in your individual bank accounts, and we don't have access to those bank accounts. So they are managed by the NDAs. We originally went with the treasurers to set the accounts up, but we don't have access to them any longer. So again, the grants policy, we're kind of under the same resolution from 1998 in terms of like what the money can be spent on generally. But what I will say is, if there's ever any doubts, if someone's applying for funding, let me know, and we can talk it through, because there's always going to be gray areas. It starts to get a little bit confusing at times. But I'm going to go a little bit more in detail about that. So some of the general things of what is not funded, anything not open to the public. So anything you do, always think, can anyone from the neighborhood or the city in general participate in this? And that's, that'll help kind of guide you. Any personal use or benefit. So, purchasing anything that you're going to keep for yourself or, that sort of thing. Just always kind of look at it that way. Definitely alcoholic beverages, marijuana, tobacco products that can't be spent on using the funding. Any kind of political donations or advocacy, anything related to that can't be used. Religious organizations, activities, or services, this can get, I added this caveat in here because we do have NDAs who have met and maybe will meet in the future in churches. So, but you can utilize church space, and sometimes maybe they'll ask for like donations to help pay for the costs of you being there, that sort of thing. And that would be okay. You're just using the space. Debt reduction or legal settlements. Hopefully that's fairly clear. And okay, cash withdrawals or cash back using debit cards. So if you do have a debit card for your account, and I think Alex, you asked about sort of how to pay. I think most of the NDA should have like a card. If you don't, you can get a debit card. But what I would steer clear from is like, using that card to like get cash. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, just because it's hard to track, obviously, that cash and kind of where it went and how it was spent, that sort of thing. Purchase of land or buildings. I don't think we give you enough money to do either one of those things. You'd have to save a lot of $4,000 over the years to buy a building, but it's in there. Any kind of travel expenses, like private travel expenses or hotel expenses, we wouldn't support. Private transportation. Unfortunately, you can't fill your tank up with gas using NDA funding. And then projects do not have property owner permission for proposed improvements. That would apply to any private or public property. So, you always have to have permission to do definitely something. And most of the time, in fact, I'd say generally most of the time, anything the NDA does is going to be happening on public property. There's no rules that say you can't do private property as long as that private property is accessible to the public, but I honestly cannot remember. There is areas in there that you could potentially start maybe a program that helps people with their private property, but would have to be available to everybody. So a good example that might be, maybe the neighborhood wants to start a program where you're helping folks, clean up around their house, I guess, or like maybe folks who can't, cut their grass. You want to start a program where you're going to help people who can't mow their lawn due to physical, maybe abilities, that sort of thing. But you'd have to open that up to like make a program out of it and make it available to everyone to share in that. We don't see a lot of that happen. Most of it's public events, public property, that sort of thing. There's this, service or activity contrary to federal, state, or local statute, ordinance, or regulations. I don't exactly know what that means, but it's in there. Other considerations about the grant program, at any time we can ask for, bank account statements and that sort of thing. The only time I'm really going to ask is with the annual report. And I think there was a question about sort of what that includes. With the annual report, I always send out a pretty detailed email about sort of what I'm looking for. And then I get that stuff back and I review it. And if there's not enough info, I'll let you know, and we can kind of go back and forth if we need to. Just know that you don't get your next check until all the boxes have been checked for that report. And then the check request goes to finance for that next $4,000 allotment into your bank account. But I'll let you know when all that happens. So I think that's what most of this slide talks about. One of the things you're going to see in the report is carryover grants amounts. We basically do ask for folks, if you have more than $4,000 in your account, to we ask the NDAs to kind of describe how you'd like to hope to spend that money in the future. We don't necessarily say NDAs can't save their money, for something real big, but we would like the NDAs to have an idea of what they're saving for. We don't necessarily want you to save the money for the sake of saving money. Mostly because, you know, these bank accounts aren't necessarily one that you necessarily want to grow too large, because once they get too big, you know, the IRS and that sort of thing, you start to get into these areas that where you got too much money in a way, and then you know maybe then we're starting to talk about, like, should we be forming nonprofits, because the NDAs are not nonprofits. They don't have that status. We haven't really had a problem with that, but we also just want you to spend your money. I mean, honest, to be you know, if you have ideas for events and things you want to do, definitely do it. That's what the money is there for. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily look at it as something like we need to save because there's something that we definitely want to do, but we're not sure what it is. You know, I wouldn't do that. That wouldn't be what I would recommend. Let's see, annual grant report. So the citywide annual grant report. So after I get all of your reports for the year, I put together this real simple report that's published on the city website and shared with the community about how you spent your money for the past year. It's kind of a way to brag, you know, hey, we did all these awesome things. You know, you should get involved with your neighbor. Look at these awesome things they do. So, you know, through the year, if you have like photos or like thank you letters or, you know, different things like that that you receive, you know, include those with your annual report too. It's not required, but any of that kind of stuff is always good to like get out into the world that, you know, good things are happening and you should be part of it. Because I think that's one of the ways that we can get people, you know, actively involved. Once they find out you have money and you become, you know, they're like, wow, I have some ideas for that, you know. So, any questions on the grants? There'll probably be more as we move on and all that, but one thing I will bring up is I know there's been a lot of topic about groups coming to NDAs. You're asking for funding, they're going to all the NDAs, and that includes some of our boards and committees, the arts committee, other folks. And that's totally fine. I think the challenge for some of the NDAs has become like, how much money do we save for ourselves and how much money do we give away? I don't have an answer for that, to be honest. Some NDAs spend all their money every year and want to do more fundraising. Other NDAs aren't spending their money and are completely okay with supporting other groups and have the money to do it. And that's where that work plan comes into, you know, you could talk in September, say, hey, you know what, we have plans. We want to spend $2,000 on these 4 things for ourselves, and we're going to make $2,000 available to the community. But what I will say is make sure if you're not providing the money to the community folks who are coming to you, you definitely want to have a plan for the money. You don't want to just say, I don't want to give you the money, but I don't have any plans for it. That's, you know, obviously that's not going to go over well. The city is providing this money so that good things happen with it. And we certainly wouldn't want to, you're going to see most of the groups coming to you. They're doing pretty great things. Some pretty awesome events. You know, our museum is always looking for funding to do their programming, lots of stuff, you know, and I think it's pretty cool that the NDAs have that ability to support some of those things. So hope that makes sense. All right, how are we doing? 7:33. I'm probably not going to make it through all of my slides, but if I don't get to land use, there's a training that I will point you to. It's pretty good. It's very good, actually, that just happened a few months ago, and that can help a lot. I want to talk about permits. So we have a temporary event permit application. Our events person that processes these, his name is Dan Harris. I used to process all the permits, but now Dan does. So anytime you want to do an event in a park or on public property, close a street, that sort of thing, we have this temporary event permit. There's no fee. It just makes sure that the police and all the people that need to know about events are aware and are able to sign off and give feedback. Block parties have their own permit because there's, you know, certain nuances about block parties that we wanted to make sure was in that, and like how to close the street, things like that. So block parties have their own permit. And then there's North Clackamas Parks and Rec special use permits. So if you are in a park doing an event, you'll want to get a permit from the city and a permit from NCPRD to do your event. We used to try to just do one, but lots of miscommunication has happened over the years. And so it's a good idea just to do both. NCPRD does have fees, but I believe they waive them for NDAs still. Yes, I can definitely send this presentation out, Michelle. So I will do that. And the last thing I want to mention was event supply trailer. We have a supply trailer that NDAs can utilize that has tables, chairs, garbage cans, and some other stuff in it. You just reserve that through me. Our facility staff drop it off and pick it up. There's a little form to fill out that I'll give you, kind of an agreement that says you're gonna, put everything back and make sure it's clean, all of that kind of stuff. But the NDAs can use that for the picnics and other events. So definitely keep that in mind. It's certainly useful when you need tables and chairs and tents and all that kind of stuff. I did make it to land use basics. Look at that. All right, before I jump into land use, is there any other questions that haven't come up? I'm looking back, leading meetings, annual integrated officer roles, pay online invoice. I think maybe that's getting a card. Was that answered, Alex, do you think? Maybe the NDA getting a card to do that, is that? Hopefully that answers your question. Michelle, do you have a question?
Yes, I'm trying to remember. Trying to remember it. It was quick. Oh yeah. And this is probably on a website somewhere. Like all these new treasurers, I'd love to talk to the treasurers or just be able to connect with some of the other officers. Is that posted probably on the city site or something, or?
The only folks whose contact information is on the city site is typically the chair. Is like the primary point of contact. I can definitely share contact information with, if you'd like that. Like a treasurer.
Okay with people. I don't want to, yeah, like I'd like to talk to other treasurers, but even just other members.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly do that at the leadership meetings, but if folks want contact information for anyone, let me know. And I can always like share that with folks. And then if folks choose to, contact that person, you can do that. How's that sound?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, like you could do like a treasurer support group.
Maybe, yes.
I mean,
All
that
right.
honestly might be useful. I mean, I could see why kind of sharing ideas and how you go about doing stuff can be helpful.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, how about I'll reach out to everybody, and I don't think most folks wouldn't have a problem with that. I don't think so. Yeah, I'll figure out a way to do that. All right. I think I'll move into land use a little bit. Like I said, the training is really good to go through. I'm not a planner. I don't know, all the different things, but I wanted to talk a little bit about it. So again, April 6, 2002 is when it's on our YouTube channel. There's the link. And like I said, I'll send this out so folks can get to that. What is land use planning? It's the decision-making process for how we use land. It's guided by our comp plan, which we recently have gone through a major, renewal or update of our comp plan. And it really guides everything that the city does. And it is, honestly, it's not even just land use these days. It's really grown to be, social justice, lots of different things are included in the comp plan now that weren't previously. I mean, obviously how we use our land impacts everybody in a variety of socioeconomic ways. So it is important. So I mentioned land use planning in Oregon. We have 19 statewide goals. They're achieved through the comp plan. And there is a thing that we have, and I will share. It's called, so you received a land use or development review notice. Now what? That shouldn't say not what, that should say now what. I'll share that with you. It was created by a former city councilor in Portland, actually, but it's really good. It's very simplifies things down to very basic, because it's, even though this is complicated stuff, it can be very basic at the same time. So some things I just want to make sure you keep in mind. So when we receive a land use application, we have 120 days to make a decision. If we don't make a decision in 120 days, it has to be approved. So there are going to be times where it seems like things are coming to the NDA super fast and you got to make a, super fast decision and all that. There's a reason for that, because this 120 days starts well before the sort of public process begins. And so it goes a lot faster than sometimes we hope we want it to. But that's just how, to be fair to those who are trying to develop and that sort of thing, that rule was created. Again, public involvement's a statewide goal. If there's one thing that for land use that I always try to get across to folks is, like, when you're talking about and looking at these applications, the Planning Commission and others are going to look at the approval criteria and whether or not they approve or not something. So that's what you want to look at. You want to look at the approval criteria when you make comment to them about something. And it'll be listed, included on there. And that's how they're going to base their decision. So you really don't want to try to give them comment about something or make arguments that's not related to that. Stick to that, and that's going to make a lot more, get you a lot further. So there's strict rules about public hearings, about fairness and disclosure. Conditions, you're going to see conditions a lot, conditions of approval, that sort of thing. And the general rule is that a proposal can be conditioned to meet criteria, the approval criteria. It usually is. So just keep that in mind when you see conditions of approval, that sort of thing. Again, land decisions are based on criteria and standards, and it's all about really the approval criteria. And that'll make a lot more sense when you start to sort of get into looking at these things. So one thing I wanted to mention was what comes to NDAs and what doesn't. So we get different types of land use referrals. We get building permits, very simple. Obviously, the NDAs aren't going to be able to provide feedback on building permits. There's no referral to the public. Then there's type 1 applications that are done by administrative level. So that means basically the staff, the planning manager makes those decisions. It's not referred, or there's no public notice, to the NDA. Type 2 is actually, there is referral with public notice, and that's when it starts to get, starts to build. So the bit, and then the next one is type 3, and that's like changes to our zoning or comprehensive plan map. It's heard by Planning Commission and City Council. That is going to be referred to the chair and the land use committee in your land use committees. Or legislative actions. Those are changes to the comp plan, zoning, code, that sort of thing. Those are like the really, really high ones. Those are certainly going to be something that the NDAs can provide comment on and get feedback. So that's really really high level. I just wanted to make sure that the approval criteria is something you look at, and know that sometimes you're not, you're going to get referred certain land use stuff, but not other stuff. And the land use stuff is going to come to the chair and the land use committee. And those are the folks that will get that. And I keep the database of folks who get that stuff. So if you're a land use committee member or a chair and you have like contact information changes over time, make sure you get those to me, because we want to make sure that stuff gets to you. That's supposed to be distributed. So, okay, providing testimony. So in terms of like the NDA providing testimony on behalf of the NDA, you always want to make sure, again, going back to like transparency. If you're going to talk about a land use thing and you're really like, and the NDA is really, make sure that's on your agenda. It's publicized, people have a chance to show up and give, because if the NDA decides, hey, we want to do public testimony, we want to provide public testimony to the Planning Commission on a subject, on a land use decision, and there's no paper trail of the NDA discussing it, but yet there's a letter that represents the NDA going to the Planning Commission, that's not good. You want to make sure that folks had a chance to weigh in. Because then you're not really representing the neighborhood, you're really representing a handful of people who talked about this, to themselves. So just keep that in mind, that there should be a trail. And that, that's always going to be your best bet. You can take a formal vote at the NDA meeting again, that's been publicized. Signing formal letters, you can send written testimony in or show up in person. The NDA can certainly, once you make a decision, hey, the NDA is going to provide testimony, you can elect someone to go to the city council meeting to provide that testimony if you'd like to do that, or write a letter. I always say, it's good, you could even do both. Sometimes it's good to get the letter to planning commission, because if you get it in a timely manner, then they have a chance to take a look at it before the meeting. And that way they can weigh it, they have a chance to really think about it rather than getting that test, seeing it the day of, and the note at the bottom here is if you're speaking on behalf of the NDA will only have standing to appeal if you declare that you're representing the NDA in the initial hearing. Yes. So basically the initial hearing, you can't show up like other hearings. You'd have to show up at that particular, sometimes stuff gets pushed off to the next, the next meeting if they don't get through it, that sort of thing. So that, this is really rare. I mean, I honestly, there's not a lot of appeals that happen over time. It is something the NDAs can do. But again, it's rare. So, if the time comes, you can certainly touch base with me and we can kind of walk through what the best steps are. Or that planner on those, on the documents you received that, is going to be listed on there, communicate with that person. They're there to answer your questions, tell you about how to provide public testimony, guide you through the process. That's their job. So, don't be shy to contact those folks and chat with them to make sure you're doing things right. Again, I just said, yeah, keep the staff in the loop, make sure your information is accurate. And there's just certain things about providing testimony that you're going to be asked to provide your name and address. Don't waste your time with generalities. You're going to have a limited amount of time to speak if you go to speak in person. So just make sure that you're concise. You don't need to repeat things over and over again. You don't need 4 members to say the same thing 4 times in a row. That's not going to necessarily help. Just be concise, and let them and do your testimony. And offer at the end to answer any questions if there's time, because sometimes they do have follow-up questions. All right, we're gonna get through this material, and we might even do it before 8 o'clock. Amazing. So that, again, there's a lot more about land use that I think you can learn through the other training, and I'd encourage you to watch that. I just wanted to mention, Engage Milwaukee is something that I encourage everybody to sign up for if you haven't already. We're trying to use that, more and more to engage with the overall community. And to really interact with it, you do have to register. And there's a bunch of reasons we did that, but we're really able to collect a little bit of demographic information. And we have about 900 people registered on this page now. And so every time we add something on there, like recently we put the body worn cameras for police on there, we were able to just reach out to 900 people automatically and start receiving feedback from them. And so that's why we're growing that group of people that are registered on that account, so that every time we have something new coming up or we're looking for people to get involved with and give us and engage with the city on, we want to make sure we're not starting from scratch, every time. We've been able to get amazing demographics about sort of who's participating, who's not, who we're missing, who should we be reaching out to in more deliberate ways that just aren't participating online, and that sort of thing. So we have official social media channels, of course, for the Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for the city. We definitely share stuff as much as possible. And the community booth, I wanted to mention, that's back up and running this year with volunteers. If I believe some of you are signed up for either, or maybe have even already done it. We have I think we have a couple openings left in September and August, but it filled up pretty quick. But we have some NDA members, board and commission members. It's basically, if you don't know what it is, it's a booth that we have at the farmers market. They set it up for us. We have it the second and fourth Sunday, May through October. And city staff go out there, city council members, working commission members, NDA members. I put it all together basically each time we have it, and folks can volunteer to come and talk to community members about city stuff, the NDAs. You know, it's a good opportunity to just engage with general community members, even people who don't live in the city but like our market. And they can find out how amazing we are, right? So that's I think that's my presentation. That's all I had. I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see you all a little bit better. There we go. Well, I did it before 8, and you know, I'm happy to take any other questions if anybody has any. Yeah, I really do appreciate everybody coming and being involved, and I like this stuff a lot. Been doing it for a long time. So I'm glad to have you here. The more people to get involved, the easier my job gets, actually. It makes me look good, actually, too, because if people don't get involved, then it looks like I'm not doing my job. So
I have a quick little, I was wondering if, I think I heard on the council meeting that July 25th was going to be a Bowman Gray open house. Do you know if that date is correct?
I don't, but I can check.
Oh, well, I could email Adam more, I guess. So
Yeah.
What is that? A what open house?
well, Bowman Gray is an undeveloped park in the Lake Road neighborhood. And I heard at the city council meeting, July 25th, first it was going to be July 28th, but they think July 25th, but that's on a Monday. So I don't know if that's really the correct date or not, but I could email him. It's to find out what the community thinks about how to develop that. There's just like lots that are bare, how to develop it into a park.
Yeah, we the first one they were focused on was Scott Park next to the library. There was an event for that. So I think they're having a similar event like that for all 3 parks.
Yes.
So there's 3 parks that we're developing using money that we got basically from like the state that came down from the federal government, you know, because of the COVID relief, you know, efforts. But we have money to build. These 3 parks have been under plans for development for a long time. One's in Ardenwald, one's in Lake Road, and one's downtown here by the library. And I think that model they did at Scott Park, it worked really well. A lot of engagement. And so, yeah, I think Bowman Bray, and I'll definitely try to share that with everybody. And I think that the way they want to do it is they're going to do an in-person event and then an Engage Milwaukee like survey as well, a survey at the event as well, and then other outreach is included in that. So yeah, so you know, always look at my Friday update, even if you scan through like the major topics. I try to include all that stuff in there that I can, just to make sure that people aren't missing things, or our city calendar on the web. Always a good place to take a look at every now and then and see what's coming up. Or you know, if your NDA is having an event too, make sure you let me know. We can get it on the city calendar and help you with that marketing and publicity. Oh, one final thing I do want to mention, since summertime's coming up, we can help. We have mailing lists. So if you ever want to do a mailing to your neighborhood, folks, I can give you a mailing list. Jordan has helped NDAs with graphic design here and there if he has time. I'm a terrible graphic designer, so I'm not great help on that, but he's helped, you know, make invitations or flyers and things like that. We just got to give him plenty of time because he's got a lot to do. But he can help in those areas if you need it. You know, you can use an NDA funds for that sort of thing as well. Oh, another thing that came to mind. On Engage Milwaukee, you will be hearing from me at some point, either in July or August. I want to do an NDA survey basically before September meetings come up. And it's just going to hopefully ask the community in general, you know, what neighborhood do you live in? Do you attend your NDA meeting? If you do, how often? If you don't, why not? You know, things like that. What would encourage you to come more if you're not already involved? So I want to put something like that together, and I want to get some feedback from folks before I launch that on what I'm asking. So you'll see that coming from me in the next month or so. And I hope to do that every year. So we have our elections in May, training in June. And then before September, we get some feedback from folks about like what might, encourage people to come more. Teresa, yeah.
Okay, well, from past experience with Debbie way back when, food was a big draw. Pizza, that was the biggest draw. People, it was dinner time. People didn't want to miss their dinner. That way they wanted to come. It worked.
I went to the Scott Park thing, and there were definitely the longest lines for the like bratwurst and sausage or whatever. They had like a whole thing there, and you had to actually go participate and provide feedback before you could get your free food. So it was, and also from my 4-year-old's point of view, face paint is a must, because ever since she got face paint at Scott Park, she's been asking for it every weekend since. So we'll be going to the Bowman Bray one, not just because I live in Lake Road, but if there is face paint there, we will be there. She'll sniff it out.
It's a great idea. I love their idea of like, you can eat, but you have to do a few things first.
It worked really well, because we tried to just get in line for the food because she was hungry, and they're like, no, you need a ticket. It's free, but you have to go. Can we just give you money? They said, no, you have to go do all of the stuff. So yeah, it was good.
Definitely. So yeah, food. When we're back to in person, I'm hoping fall, we can do that more. Fingers crossed. I feel like I've been saying that for like 2 years though, but because I have. So yeah.
I want to thank you, Jason. This was very informational. I learned a lot. I did this a long time. And I also wanted you to know that I have always, even when I wasn't in an officer in the neighborhood, I always read your Friday updates.
Oh, thank you.
and they're great.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't bore you. I know that some of this stuff can be, it's not super exciting, but
Ray Bryan used to send them out. Were they really yours? Did he just put his name on it? We used to get Friday updates from Ray, and I never saw any from you, but yours looked just like his used to.
If I run into Ray, I'm gonna have a chat about that.
About that, yeah.
All right, well, you know where I'm at, and if you ever need a chat, I'm here more than I'd like to be, actually, but it's a job. Definitely touch base if you're ever confused about something. There's no stupid questions. There's no, we're all volunteers, and I know everybody's learning this stuff as we go, and there's always going to be something that you'll probably stump me on as well. So absolutely. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Jason.
Have a good night.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.